So, got any weekend plans?
Thought we might go to Six Flags.
Oh, you better be careful. Did you hear about that girl that got her feet amputated on the Tower of Power ride? Six Flags sounds nice. Some enjoy it, others hate it, but no one can escape it. Small talk is a permanent fixture of life, an unavoidable social lubricant, and if you live in America, it's crucially important to your professional career. I like to think of myself as fairly competent, high in social awareness, and charming when needed, but that doesn't stop me from looking like a damn fool when it comes to chewing the fat. I'm introverted, socially anxious, and my interests are frankly rather strange. So I'm back in my natural habitat to do what I feel most comfortable doing, researching and analyzing human behavior from the recluseful safety of my computer. After all, I need to understand small talk if I'm ever going to succeed in my quest to appear normal. You're late for work. You're exhausted. You didn't get much sleep last night. Instead, you lied awake stressing over unpaid bills in an uncertain future. You feel your life is at the brink of collapse, but you manage to drag your sorry self into work. As you pull in, get out of the car, and walk into the office, your coworker asks,
"How are you?"
And you say, "Good, you?" You don't need me rehashing this bit of observational comedy. It's been done to death.
If you have the audacity to tell people how you're doing when they say how you doing, that shit is rude and selfish, all right?
We get it. There's a social script to the "how are you" question, and an honest answer is not a part of it. There's only a handful of acceptable replies. I'm personally a "good you" type of guy. Often you can even get away with just a nod as a response, affirming that you recognize their greeting. And this proves the point further that this question is bullshit. It isn't genuine, at least in the literal sense. When someone asks "how are you," they aren't checking up on how you're feeling. What they're really gauging is how you're feeling towards them. Are you still a friend and not a foe? It's easier to think of these banal greetings and casual exchanges of words like a handshake, which is why we've developed such knee-jerk reactions to them. I usually spurt out "good you" before the person has even finished asking the question. In 1923, anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski made perhaps the first attempt to thoroughly dissect small talk. He referred to this inconsequential chit-chat as phatic communion. Phatic communion refers to speech that conveys no useful information, but is instead done to create or maintain social relationships. This covers greetings, pleasantries, and all the superficial banter we consider small talk. The actual words are of no importance. Someone may as well be saying,
"Go f yourself."
It's all the same as long as it can convey the sentiment of being a friend and not a foe. It's the linguistic pairing to the handshake. Whereas the handshake was a sign to show that neither side was holding a weapon, phatic communion likewise shows that one is friendly and open to a relationship. Looking at small talk through this lens makes it sound rather useful, and it would be, if it was optional. Exchange students, tourists, and those relocating to the USA for work are probably familiar with the phrase, "Americans are like peaches." The full phrase, "Americans are more like peaches, the French are more like coconuts," comes from Professor Aaron Mayer, and is commonly recited during intercultural training to prepare foreigners for the social horrors that await them. What it means is that, like peaches, Americans are very soft on the outside, quick to open up and start a dialogue with those they've just met. But only superficially. Their true self, their private self, is kept closely guarded, only shared with family and trusted friends, and this is their pit. Conversely, other cultures, like the French, resemble coconuts. They keep a hard exterior, cold to strangers, but once that shell is broken, it's easy to get to the meat of them, to form a close bond. This is a wonderful analogy because it explains so simply the long-standing judgment by Americans that the French are rude, and that to the French, Americans are artificially friendly. Americans being peaches turns out to be relatable for many cultures around the world. Jai Choi, an exchange student from South Korea, agreed wholeheartedly with the analogy. She very much wanted to build close relationships during her time abroad, but found that too difficult to do with Americans. Jai stated that if a Korean stranger smiled at her in the streets, she'd think something was wrong with them, but she'd much rather have that than the fake pleasantries. She desired genuine interactions, to see only smiles if they were meant. It's important to note that this analogy arose from more than just Mayer and others' personal experience. Trumpeter's model of national culture differences is a list of 7 dimensions that make up a country's culture. This model is used primarily to help multicultural business relations. The dimension we are interested in is the specific versus diffuse dimension. Specific cultures, like the US, are ones in which individuals have a small degree of privacy and a large degree of personal sharing. Diffuse cultures, like Germany, have a high degree of privacy and low public sharing. This dimension is what the peaches versus coconuts analogy is based on, which is helpful for us to know because it gives it more validity. If we were to dig deeper, ask the question we always should, why? Why are Americans peaches? Well, that's a tough one. Americans' overly amiable nature has been noted as early as the 1830s, when Alexis de Tocqueville was surprised by how friendly Americans were compared to the unsociable English. So whatever the reason, it would need to be deeply ingrained in our culture. If you were to ask Moira Delgado, an outreach specialist for services for international students and scholars, she'd point to the deep-rooted American desire for independence. When deeper relationships evolve, someone is cracking into our pit, and that often leads to a feeling of emotional dependency. They truly know us now, we've let down our guard, and that emotional dependence scares Americans. Although I like this theory because it aligns closely with opinions I've shared in the past, it's only just that, a theory. In reality, there is no concrete answer to why we are peaches, and we may never know, but we are, and that's an important part of understanding small talk. Our journey in understanding small talk brings us to yet another model for multicultural business, Aaron Mayer's culture map. This time we are presented with 8 dimensions that define a culture, and we'll be looking at communication. A culture can either utilize high context or low context communication. High context describes communication that's more nuanced. Comments are more implicit, often requiring reading between the lines. And if comments go over your head, well then you lack the education or experience. The French would fall into this group. Low context cultures are more explicit in their communication. People express plainly and clearly what they mean. There's no place for hints or allusions. Under this type of communication, a failure in understanding is the fault of the speaker. And the US, Aaron noted, is the lowest context communicating culture in the world. This again explains the culture clash of France and America. The French can be seen as arrogant, speaking above their audience, and Americans can be seen as ham-fisted, talking dumb. If we ask why this time, why are Americans low context, we actually have a fairly good explanation. America is the melting pot. The US has always relied on immigrants, and having a wide variety of cultures and languages attempting to work together requires low context communication. Otherwise, communicating would simply be too confusing for everyone. So what we have is a bunch of low-context communicating peaches. The American small talks epidemic now starts making a lot of sense. American peach culture dictates we be overly friendly to strangers, and to be low-context, our form of communication needs to be direct, limit any ambiguity. This means that silence is a no-no. Silence is not only a hard action, something a coconut would do, but it's ambiguous. Because Americans are less able to read the atmosphere, they are less able to judge friend from foe during silence. So silence bothers us more than other cultures. Nonverbal communication would fall under high context communication, so North Americans don't put much stock in it. North Americans largely consider that one shows themselves to others through what they say, not how they act. Even though current research indicates approximately 70% of communication is nonverbal, most Americans think of communication as essentially a verbal activity. Any break in conversation, even a minute, will unnerve many Americans. So it's filled with banal, pointless chatter, Vedic communion, to put each other at ease, conform to the culture, and show each other we're all just a bunch of normal peaches. After all, you wouldn't want to stick out and look like a coconut now, would you? Taking everything we know about small talk now, we can see that yes, it's a positive tool to put others at ease, but at the same time, it's also not really optional. American culture necessitates that it be done. If we don't partake in small talk, we're going against the grain, so it's definitely not optional if we want others to like us. So how do we do it? Sports, the weather, and how was your weekend? The terrible triad. If you can master these, you've reached competency. You don't need my help. But say you're a bit unconventional. Say you have zero interest in sports. Let's say every time people talk about the weather, you say, "Oh, that's still a thing?" Let's say you can't ever be honest about what you do over the weekend because it would raise a few eyebrows. Well, here's how I, a coconut, appear normal and manage to not lose my mind. First off, you're going to get the terrible triad. A lot. But that's okay. For sports, I say up front, I know nothing. But that doesn't mean I can't make a conversation out of it. I use a technique described by Alan Garner in Conversationally Speaking, and progress the conversation from small talk to deep talk through open-ended questions. As someone devoid of passion for sports, I am genuinely curious as to why others are. It's different, and that propels my dialogue. So say someone's talking about the game last night. I'll say, "Who is your team?" Then progress to, "How long have you been a fan?" And then, "What originally brought about your interest in them?" At this point, I'm usually knee-deep in personal history. An interest in sports, 9 times out of 10, is usually passed down from the parents. Their father was a big Mets fan, so they are now too. So now I'm talking about family traditions. I'm not cracking any pits, but I'm getting to know someone's personal life. The conversation has actual value now. Information is being exchanged, and we have left Vedic communion. This one isn't so easy. I've made the mistake once of bringing up climate change, and boy, just don't open that box. What I do is fire off preference questions until one gets my foot in the door. Oftentimes I get one-word answers, or I don't knows, and that's fine, because everyone has at least one thing in the year they look forward to, and it always comes out, eventually. The last of the terrible triad, small talk about the weekend, is the bane of my existence. It's a garbage question. Asking either, "Do anything fun over the weekend?" or "Got any plans for the weekend?" will always result in only 2 responses. Either a deflecting response, which is what I always give, which immediately ends your small talk and now you gotta struggle for a different topic, or the responder will have an answer for you, and now you have to sit through the drudgery of them recounting a family outing or their home improvements. Now look, I'm not down on people having a fun weekend, but hearing about someone else's weekend is on the same level as hearing about their dreams, and nothing will make my eyes glaze over faster, so I try to jump ship on this topic as fast as possible. What I do and what I do in the remainder of small talk situations is ask questions. Yes, the tired old just listen and let them do all the work tactic, but there's a bit more to it than that, at least if you want to be good at it. The very popular book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, taught me an important lesson about a decade ago, and it's helped me greatly. You need to be authentic. Half-hearted listening can be spotted a mile away. Low-context communicators can still pick up on nonverbal cues, even if they don't value them. So you must be genuinely interested. Only ask questions you're curious about. For example, I was talking to a painter. Maybe it wasn't the most interesting thing in the world, but it excited him to talk about it. Through questions, I was able to find out the best method to paint around trim, how sponge painting was all the rage in the 80s, and how popcorn ceilings haunt his dreams. The moral of the story is that everyone has something they can teach us, and they're often excited to share that knowledge. Even people who despise small talk will open up if they see there's authenticity in your curiosity, because at that point, it's not really small talk anymore, is it? And that's what our goal always should be. Conform to the culture, give the verbal handshake, and then move on to something substantial as fast as possible. A study released in 2010 produced results that support this tactic. The results showed that people were significantly happier when they partook in deep conversations as opposed to superficial banter. When the study came out, it led to a slew of pop psychology articles bashing small talk, misconstruing what the research actually showed in order to get clicks, because who doesn't want confirmation that small talk makes us unhappy? But in actuality, the paper also showed that small talk was very beneficial, if compared to being solitary. Nowadays, in the times of COVID, pop psychology articles are actually going back to the same study and singing a different tune. Now, small talk is being called integral to our mental health, a victim of work-from-home orders that we should mourn. But again, they're missing the point. Behavioral scientist Jessica Methot remarked how small talk is important to make us feel seen. To have brief, even superficial moments of acknowledgement from another human is critically important to our mental state. And I agree, but that's only if you're comparing small talk to no talk at all. That doesn't mean small talk should be championed, it just means we've lowered the bar. Instead of small talk versus deep talk, it's small talk versus no talk. We need to think in terms of the big picture. This isn't a question of all or nothing. It's a question of how do we interact with our fellow humans when the chance arises. I, for one, would prefer to go through my day without having to interact with everyone I see. I want my coconut skin. But if I need to work with others, patients, clients, coworkers, I want to be authentic. I want a smile to mean a smile. I still want my private life, or need it I should say, because my views and hobbies are stigmatized, but I want a human connection when I interact with others. I want and aim to be a coca peach. Hard shell, soft middle, and a pit. So if you ever see me, don't ask me how I am. Not unless you want to get into my coca peach.